really break down this quadruple Delny comp, which I think this is the first time I've ever seen 4 Delnys be brought into a match. Pretty interesting to see here. The 4 Delnys, again, 3 Delnys being dedicated towards B, CL hoping for a pretty fast cap there, but not getting it. Again, good play here, recognizing that there's no radar, and the Gdansk here laying that initial smoke screen so he can just use his own radar and force the Delnys out. And then again, that super aggressive Delny push onto A here, I think was pretty key for BONKZ. Driving this Delny away at the start, taking a lot of his HP off as well, which I think was very pivotal towards the later game, especially since the Delny ended up dying. So very, very good initial strategy here from BONKZ, recognizing that there's no radar, knowing what they can do with their Gdansk players and taking advantage of it.
Yes,
but
they
again,
definitely abused the strengths that they had towards the A side of the map. What's also interesting, I pointed out before the game started, is without the, having those fast ships to go around the 9-10 line, basically doing this, CL went around it by just having a brute force approach of having 3 Delnys followed by 2 Napolis, a Colombo, and a St. Vincent. So this is like a super heavy commitment. It's 7 out of the 9 ships that are playing for the 2 home caps, which they actually did end up securing. But is it worth the time investment of those 7 ships? That's the big question.
Yeah, it really depends on how long they can delay those C and A caps for, or the B and A caps rather, which they were able to do for a little bit, but especially on A, I think that their Delny got punished for his early line there. Whereas before, if he had played a little bit more towards the 1 line, he probably would have been fine. But we can see that push starting to come in here. Again, like you mentioned, CL not really going for the push over the island at all, and instead just opting to go straight through with the brute force with the Napoli smokes. And again, the island positions here can be pretty hard to dig out.
Yes.
But when you have Napolis and Delnys, you can kind of just go straight for it. And I think CL really did bring the proper ships for the job. The St. Vincent as well is definitely one of the better pushing ships to bring here because of the concealment, the good guns, the armor scheme, and again, the torpedoes on the bow for when you're pushing those island positions.
Indeed, yeah. And I would honestly also like to point out the Colombo player that we had from CL, who was hanging out like slightly farther in the back next to the home cap of CL. He was doing a lot of damage throughout the game. He actually, I think, ended the game around 140k, which is a fairly respectable amount of damage for a 9v9 in competitive. The damage is usually very evenly spread across. And also something interesting to point out for the viewers at home, the side panels that you see, there's numbers on the side of them. Those numbers that you see are actually the amount of damage the players are doing. So in real time, those numbers will update. You can see how much damage each player is doing. So like Baz was mentioning, that Colombo did rack up a lot of damage with the SAP shells, and them putting him in a pretty big position here, being able to help hold B, being able to shoot towards the D cap here, pretty pivotal. Indeed.
But you can see BONKZ already reacting. They go with that super aggressive play onto A. They push through B, force that Delny out. And at this point, you can see that they've managed to pick up that Delny kill on the 1 line thanks to the early HP trades. They will be forcing this Napoli away, bringing their Gdansk through B even to help push him off. And then also putting this Delny down very low and forcing him away from B towards the C cap. So really, CL's path in the game here is to have to force this Libertad out of B, push through like this, and then try to clean it up. But unfortunately, they weren't really able to make that happen. So we can play through the rest of the render here, see how that push goes. You can see the Libertad takes a ton of damage here from the Colombo SAP and just 2 salvos, but unfortunately that last salvo was not able to finish him. And then, of course, that Delny with the almost hero play trying to back cap A, but unfortunately gets picked up on the Gdansk radar. That fast cooldown radar does pick him up, and then he gets lit on fire. But even if he hadn't been lit on fire, I think he probably would have died since the Gdansk can just match his path to A.
I'm very likely guessing that the Gdansk actually had RPF, so they had a suspicion of this happening, as well as the
Libertad
would have been spotted the whole time, and they would have been like, oh, there's a destroyer probably pushing towards me, can you come help me out? And they found him. Very unfortunate in terms of the timings, I guess. If they get the kill, don't die, they definitely win out immediately, but since they lost the kill and they also didn't get the kill on the Libertad, they ended up losing.
We'll be going to game 3 instead of a CL2-0. So interesting to see what we'll see on Hotspot here. We can recap here CL's kind of dominant cap control playstyle here. Again, very interesting to see them switch into this from their first 2 matches, which were very, very hard pushes with usually 7-2 ship splits. But if we pause here, we can see that they're opting for just a very traditional strategy here that we'll usually see in King of the Sea. Bringing out the smoke screen with the gearing the Brisbane onto D, playing control in the middle with the 1 Gdansk for the radar, and then having a 4-ship hold on their A side. So again, I would say a pretty usual split. Being matched by BONKZ playing actually, I would say, a pretty similar lineup.
Yeah, definitely. It was also interesting and probably important to point out that the early torpedoes from the Gdansk of CL actually ended up catching the Elbing over here. And similarly, the gearing torpedo actually caught the Gdansk from CL's side, him also going to half HP roughly. So a lot of the early game torps can be crucial in deciding which team actually is favored with the DD trades. And eating torps, especially in the early game, is very, very punishing.
Yep. And I have to say, I've been pretty pleased with the cap layout so far. And previous King of the Sea hotspot did have that C cap in the islands here. It was usually a pretty stalematey cap. It was not uncommon to see control just be frozen over that cap for most of the match.
Yep.
But I think with the layouts that we've seen so far on hotspot, on trap, on land of fire, we're seeing a lot more dynamic games, which is super exciting. So we can go ahead and see as the match progresses here. Again, that Colombo play being very aggressive on the D cap. CL kind of recognizing that there's only the gearing in the Des Moines there and looking to punish it as hard as possible. But again, you can see that the Colombo spots a Libertad sitting here and probably recognizes that he can't just keep going with this push or he'll be crossfired.
Yep.
So he makes the smart play and turns around and will actually go join up with his Gdansk here above the islands in order to try to punish any sort of BONKZ play that is looking for the crossfire on their pushing force.
Yep. I think it's important to note that the map is fairly evenly split, right? They are respecting the middle of the map very well. They generally don't want to push too deep and put them into a crossfire. So they are just chilling for the time being. And eventually they do end up in a position where they can relax for the time being. Like in this sort of situation, they have seen that the BONKZ Libertad has now turned around and is ready to basically make a push in.
Yeah, we're seeing a very strong reaction from BONKZ here where they recognize that they probably think that what happened to them in the first 2 games is kind of happening here with CL opting to make that very aggressive push down through the east side of the map here and bringing back their assets from middle to try to help hold that push, kiting their ships away. And then the Libertad trying to go up here for the crossfire is ultimately the fatal maneuver for him and does not work out so well.
Yes, I'm also would like to point out the fact that the guys at A have done a very good job of not overcommitting.
Yeah.
They are technically in numbers parity. They have a 4v4 going on, but they don't really need to make a push because they are in a point lead at this point. It's like 60 points. And they can actually rotate someone back towards the middle, even if they don't end up doing anything towards A, and then have more crossfire over the ships that are hanging out between the C and the D cap. Even if the Libertad here did not die, with the Colombo moving back here in this sort of area and the Bungo being here, they would have probably been able to take him out, even if the guy did not get F-struck.
Definitely. It just would have taken a little bit longer. That might have been time for BONKZ to make some plays, but as it turns out, look at all those torpedoes forcing him to turn, and then the Colombo makes that fantastic decision to switch to AP.
Yep.
We usually see Colombos just spam a lot of sap, but the AP still works. It is still a shuttle option on that ship. And with the Sansonetti commander, you can also switch it pretty quickly.
Yes, and I'm sure he was using the unique upgrade on the Colombo, which makes your guns just that much more accurate. And it just means that there's a bit more consistency with the salvos. Colombo is already a fairly strong ship in terms of the amount of guns it brings.
It brings a lot of damage output.
It brings a lot of damage output, definitely. But with the unique upgrade, you become more of a consistent damage output instead of a big damage output that is a bit more unreliable. Yeah. So with the unique upgrade and him giving a bit too much broadside, probably because he wasn't either ready for it or he got pushed into that position to try and dodge the torps and such. Giving a bit too much broadside, he gets taken out very quickly. Usually you will see battleships in King of the Sea Internationals live till they are out of heals. Usually dying with having heals remaining, consumables remaining. As a battleship or even a cruiser is fairly rare. These players are very well aware of their ship's weaknesses and their strengths, and they will do their best to play to it.
Yeah, definitely showed just a little bit too much angle there. And then after bringing the Libertad down, we see also more reactive play from CL, recognizing that the middle is open, the Colombo and Gdansk just going to slide into C and take that cap, and recognizing that they don't have to keep pushing down through D. So their smoke train has already started running away from D, decommitting from that cap, recognizing that BONKZ now has a lot of ships in the area, bringing their Gdansk and Brisbane from the C cap over towards the east side and having a strong position there now. So again, just good reactive play in general. I think after killing the Libertad, they probably recognize that BONKZ will want to make a play on the A side as well, which they end up doing.
Yep.
So again, just very good recognition there from CL. You can see as the match progresses here, moving those ships around, recognizing that the push is coming, and then just kiting away from the decap, which they don't need to control anymore because they've already gotten C.
Indeed.
Yep. So that will wrap it up for CL versus BONKZ. Pretty well played from both teams. We saw BONKZ bring a pretty impressive showing for game 2 and 3 here. Just a few key mistakes for them, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. I'm very happy to see this series play out into all 3 maps. Both teams actually showed very interesting strats where they both had either explosive openings or they were playing a fairly relaxed and more controlled setup, especially from CL in game 3, which was not their playstyle for map 1 and 2. Where they basically went brute force, pushing for the 2 home caps and basically trying to disrupt any sort of setup play that BONKZ was doing. Whereas in map 3, they decided to flip it all on its head and decide that, okay, now we are going to be the ones who are playing the control strategy. We're going to be very reactive and we're going to make some good calls in the mid game, actually understand what's happening, what the play from the enemy team is, and move our ships accordingly to punish it.
Yep. So again, congratulations to both teams. Again, we are played out. Again, lots of destroyers. I think seeing 4 destroyers per team here. The Haruguma, one of the classic smoke destroyer picks. Remember, with the unique upgrade, it does have a very long smoke laying duration, and the smoke also lasts for a long time. So we can pause here briefly. We can see the smoke screens coming out. The Brisbanes behind the smoke screens for both teams here, AU and HSR, going around the A cap. HSR devoting a few more resources at the start of the game towards A, do manage to flip it, but in exchange, they lose B. And to me, I think the B cap is actually the more important cap to get here early.
Yes.
Because it is so difficult to actually contest once it's taken. On Sleeping Giant, you have these positions around the islands here, the Stalingrad even over here, and now that we have destroyers like Gdansk with that fast cooldown radar, on a map like Sleeping Giant, it's very hard to flip the B cap.
Yes, the first person to usually take the cap has a significant advantage in holding it, and especially when I believe HSR here is the team that is kind of just avoiding going for the B cap at all. It means that AU had a very easy time to actually pick up the cap, and then it's ticking for most of the game. The other caps can be contested very easily, and you can potentially just have a guy sitting inside the cap for most of the game, even if you get radared. However, inside the B cap, if you get radared, you're gonna have to give it up. You're gonna have to give up the space.
There's no safe spot to cap from. Whereas potentially for A, you do have this island. It's not 100% safe, but it can be given. You can put a ship onto it to flip it over. But again, I think AU just playing a little bit more of a solid control lineup here.
Yes,
We
definitely.
see the Gdansk in the middle is a very strong pick. The Brisbane smoke train doesn't have to contest A at the start, but it will stop HSR from pushing through. And then as the situation arises, they can kind of maneuver their ships across the map whichever way they want. So definitely a stronger early position for them. And then we can see as the game develops, the Delny playing out the 10 line being very annoying. You see that AU at this point has to commit ships towards the B cap.
Yep.
If they want to flip this game, they will have to get onto it. Bringing the Ragnar over there. The Ragnar, like Robin mentioned, does have a lot of HP. It does have heals, but it's also big. And it has a long cooldown on its engine boost, which means that it's really not the best cap contester. So in the face of like a Vermont, the Stalingrad radar, plus a Gdansk, it's going to take a lot of damage.
Yeah, what's important to note, obviously, is that the Stalingrad over here behind the D cap actually has radar range that covers the B cap.
Yeah.
So if the Ragnar touches the cap, he's going to get radared by Stalingrad first, and then he's going to get radared by the Gdansk afterwards. So there is no safe way for the Ragnar to actually contest the cap and flip it in the duration where the cooldown of both the ships that have the radar is on. So they will have to most likely shove something that's a bit bigger that can actually tank inside the cap to at least block the points. And given that it's a 4 cap map and they are on 2-2 and the points are relatively equal, it's either a kill that flips the points into one team's favor or getting an extra cap.
Yep.
HSR's plan was to get the cap and then chill, but I don't think they actually ended up flipping this cap, and they actually conceded a kill to AU, which basically solidified their lead in the game and then the victory as well.
In fact, as the match goes on, you'll see that Ragnar just takes so much damage. So HSR, in trying to flip this cap here, basically trade away one of their ships, and the Ragnar in the meantime is not applying its guns to anything. It's not using its radar. It's just sitting here and getting radared on repeat and taking a lot of damage. And we can see AU actually makes a very strong play now that they've seen the Stalingrad try to rotate over towards B on this island. They just walk their Brisbane and Harguma up and take A. Yeah. And like we were saying earlier, that rock in the middle of A provides a lot of cover. It's very easy to cap from. And since HSR are kind of playing a little bit farther back here, they really have no way to stop that from happening.
Indeed.
So at this point, having the 3 caps taking up the point lead, we can see on the east side of the map, the HSR ships have taken a lot of damage. I think AU in general has been trading very well over there, especially with the Colombo damage output. Using that Delny very aggressively in the open water space to keep lights, to make sure that HSR can't try any funny business. And then just solidifying their hold over B with the 2 radars from this position. Yeah. So in this position, it's pretty hard for HSR to swing the game back.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think the game plan coming out of AU in this game has been very good. They knew exactly what they were getting themselves into in terms of having overlapping radars, having backup strategies, knowing how to react and when to actually make a counter push, especially on the A cap. When the Stalingrad rotated off, they immediately saw it and reacted by having 2 of their ships actually just go into the cap immediately and take it.
I mean, one of the main things that can stop that push is if you have a cruiser playing this edge of the island here, it can crossfire any cruiser trying to push up. But again, as soon as they see the Stalingrad move away, they know that's a pretty easy position to take.
Yeah, so, especially with the Stalingrad and a Brisbane as an encounter, because the Stalingrad overmatches.
Yeah, I mean, every shot
basically
from the Stalingrad,
whole Brisbane.
You're basically dice rolling whether or not the Brisbane will instantly explode, but no such thing to worry about there. So as the game goes on, you can see the trades happen. HSR recognizes the need to do something, and they push a lot of their ships towards B, but at that point, they've just lost too much HP. The Ragnar and the Gdansk both go down, and they lose the match. So again, very good control setup from AU here. We've seen a lot of flexibility from the Chinese teams and being very comfortable with either the pushing strategies as well as these control strategies with the Brisbane. So I think every KOTS we see them bring a little bit better. So I'm very interested to see how they'll do this one.
Yeah, the evolution of these teams has been very fun to watch, especially how they started off a couple of years ago when they were just starting off in King of the Sea and tournaments in general, where they looked a bit confused, not really sure what the meta was like. And they didn't actually end up adapting to the meta, but more creating their own. Yeah. And it's really fun to watch a region which is super innovative in terms of what they want to do and how they want to execute it. So yeah, it's been really cool to watch these guys play.
Yep, definitely exciting to see them bring new strategies to the table. I think King of the Sea is always due for a shakeup, and I think combined with the new maps, I think we're seeing a lot of very interesting stuff. So excited what we'll see next. So why don't you go ahead and take the render away, Baz? We can see again a lot of destroyers from the RSTC side, bringing 4 DDs. 3 DDs from the them side, and again that double smokescreen pairing.
Yeah,
very
effective.
Think
I would like to already mention, compared to the previous game on Sleeping Giant, we see the RSTC daring go for the early B cap. Yep. And is immediately countered by the 2 Moskvas that are sitting behind the 2 islands, one next to the sea cap, one usually around the cove. Yep. And there's a double radar, which means that daring is very unlikely to actually get the cap.
I have to say, I do really like this initial deployment from them, where they know they don't want to contest the B cap, but they still have a plan in mind to stop it from being flipped.
Exactly.
When you have the Moskva here able to get shots onto the island, as well as the island position here with your second Moskva, the double overlapping 12-kilometer radar, means you're really not going to be at risk of losing that cap. And then you're not also really giving up too much firepower on the rest of the map in order to do that, because this Moskva can shoot all the way down the east side of the map.
Yes.
So
indeed.
It's still a very powerful position. And again, they have the double smoke screen. They have that 9-10 line push coming out with the Harguma Worcester here. And then they also have a pretty light force on A here that will be able to repush this side later. So they have a very flexible deployment, a very strong control setup that we usually see coming out from the EU teams. And I think they were definitely favored in the early game.
Yeah, absolutely. I think their opening deployment was definitely a favorable one. I kind of predicted that they would be playing this sort of strategy, very control heavy, playing around their 2 like middle of the map anchors of the 2 Moskvas. And they played very well around it until they really, I think there was a slight maybe lapse of judgment where they just gave up the middle of the map.
They were maybe a little bit overconfident, maybe did not expect the huge plays coming out. We can see here that the St. Vincent is taking a ton of damage, though.
Yes.
He's pushing very aggressively behind his Harguma Worcester here in order to help flip the decap. And in the meantime, the Napoli and the Colombo are just applying so much damage to him.
Yeah, absolutely. And we knew that from looking at the damage that the Colombo did, he was definitely
and he actually almost dies
in doing
here.
that damage.
Yep, so he almost goes down there, does manage to heal up and get away, and then we have the Libertad sending it through the middle of the map, picking up the St. Vincent, Dev striking the Worcester on the border there, and then they even pick up the Harguma with the Yu Yang radar as well. And at this point, them is a little bit too far behind and will not be able to carry the match. So very well played from RSTC here. We will be moving into game number 2 here shortly. So why don't we go ahead and throw it away to the map intro video, and then we'll see what the teams bring, to show you guys exactly how them plays this combination and why it's so effective.
All right, let's hop into it.
So again, the Cabreraus going into mid, definitely a weird pick. The Z42, one of those 6-kilometer German destroyers that has that effective hydro, lasts for a long time. We'll just lock down the B cap. And then you can see the kind of both teams' game plans developing at this point in the match. You can see them committing 3 ships down to A here along the border. The Harguma, the Worcester, the Napoli, a pretty good combination of firepower and smoke that will be able to gradually force out the Yoang and the Napoli, while also having a very good hold over the middle here with their Moskva and Z42. So them definitely opting for more of a kind of flexible control comp here, holding their home cap, having a good vision setup over B, and then having the smoke screen on A. Yep. Whereas RSTC is much more dependent on making this push around the 9-10 line here and forcing out them from their home cap, which it seems like they weren't really able to do.
Yeah.
The Marseille being open is definitely a big problem for them. It's a very tanky cruiser. It has all of its guns forward. It's very good at playing these kind of edge of the island positions. And I think what we saw in Series 1 for today, where we saw CL make a very effective push on this map, was that they actually just devoted a lot of resources to pushing straight through.
Yes.
And that meant that they didn't even have to deal with the Howdens that BONKZ brought that were on the position here. So maybe a little bit of a weaker strategy here from RSTC, especially since, like Zooey mentioned earlier, they're only bringing 4 ships here.
Yeah, I think the critical part about the strategy that really fell apart for RSTC compared to the previous game where we saw CL versus BONKZ, the amount of ships that are committed from RSTC for this home push is significantly lower. CL brought 7 ships to do the home push, and that's primarily, in my opinion, the reason why they were able to brute force through essentially the open side of the CD caps. Whereas with RSTC only bringing 4 ships, they have to respect it and have to go around the islands. Otherwise, they're exposing themselves to potentially too much of a threat from the Libertad, potentially Moskva crossfire from the middle of the map. So in this case, I think the decision they made was correct, but it was probably not a good strategy in that sense.
Yeah, the execution definitely could have been better. We can go ahead and take a look at the rest of the match here. Like we were saying, the Colombo in the previous match did a lot of damage, but in this match, he's kind of on his own over towards the AB side here. Doesn't have a lot of good targets to shoot at, whereas if maybe they had positioned it closer to C and D, it would have been able to shoot at the Libertad, do a lot more damage there, and kind of be the key to the success for RSTC. But very good play from them, very controlling. We'll be going to game 3 here in just a second here. Any predictions for now that we've seen the first 2 matches?
I have no idea. I think that them. I will retract my previous prediction. And
we can go ahead and break down that nasty Marseille-Napoli push here down the west side of the map. I mean, just very, very aggressive plays like our casters were saying. I think 3XWD very willing to take the initiative in these games. I think they were caught a little bit off guard in game number 1 by that Soviet ship push. But in game number 2 and game number 3 here, just showing such willingness to take those aggressive plays. So
yeah,
from the start,
I will already highlight something, which I kind of highlighted already, is the double Marseilles. We see them be very passive, actually go into position on the 1 line. Usually what you would see is when you spawn somewhere around here, you would go straight down this way. And while you do this, you are most likely going to get spotted by a destroyer that's contesting the A cap. Right, because the concealment makes sure that basically your concealment goes to around this area, and the Marceau or the Shimakaze that's diving the cap will spot you. Yep. While you do this, the Colombo, Cerberus, Moskva, any cruiser or battleship that exists in that sort of area will be able to do damage to you. And that HP is really, really critical for a Marseille to save at the start of the game, because you're going to be using it as a brute force mechanism.
Yeah, you need to use it during the push, not before the push.
Exactly.
And I think it's also good to note, like you were saying, that keeping the Marseilles hidden down here towards I1, all Pumba sees at the moment is a kiting Napoli and the Marceau on the cap. So they're really not sure at this point where the main 3XWD push is going to come, especially since they don't have a lot of ships already towards the east side. And Marseille is a very strong open water cruiser, so it's actually not too surprising to see teams opt to play it down the 10 line.
Yep.
But in this case, I think 3XWD did a very good job of keeping the element of surprise, and then we'll see that develop as the game goes on, and the Marseille's turn up here. And you can see they don't even launch their push initially, but there goes the engine boost, and they actually start pushing as soon as they see these two ships be bow in.
Yep.
So I think PUMBA basically had no idea that this was coming.
No.
They probably expected the Marseilles to be on the other side of the map where they didn't really have good vision control, and just got caught completely off guard here. And
Yeah, I think if we go back a little bit before the guys actually get spotted, in this position, when we see them as being here, obviously, but for PUMBA, they have no info about this whole side of the map.
Yeah.
The Marseille could have literally just gone this way, and they would have been here already if they chose to with the speed boost. But because they didn't have the information, they just were expecting something without actually having that information.
Yeah, and again, usually
And
seeing
when
that
you get
kiting
caught
Napoli,
with a Cerberus, which is a fairly slow ship, even if he wasn't going to get dev struck by the Vermont, him being caught here would have basically meant that he was going to die to the Marseilles just HEing him down.
yeah. And speaking of PUMBA's decision-making process, you can see essentially that the kiting Napoli, again, being an indicator usually of a team's weak side. Right?
Yes, yes.
And especially with a double Marseille comp, you're probably thinking, well, they're going to push with the two Marseilles somewhere and probably use the Napoli to anchor their weak side. So PUMBA at that point, seeing the Napoli, seeing the Marceau in the cap is a very tempting target here. Try to push down to dig it out. But again, the Marseilles, seeing that bow-in push here, just go straight down and take those two ships out of the game.
Yeah, that was like honestly really beautiful. I really like the thought process and decision making that went into that sort of play, because usually you would see teams do these sort of plays, but they're not as well thought out in terms of if you're going to be spotted going to there, are you going to be able to save your HP? How is this push exactly going to work? What is the trigger mechanism behind you actually saying, okay, let's go? And in this case, it was finding a cruiser that was stuck bow-in. As soon as they saw it, they jumped the gun and went for it. And honestly, it worked basically as you would expect it to. And they maybe even got a bit more than they asked for with getting the shimmer kill.
Yeah, getting two kills there is definitely a huge boon for them. And then I want to point out that even after those kills get taken off the board, they do a very good job here of splitting their push, letting the Marseille go through the Thunderdome there to hold down that angle, and then having the Marseille Napoli push upwards. So giving themselves very nice crossfire. The Vermont does take a lot of damage, but it's still a very big threat on this corner of the map as well. So from this stage of the game, it's very, very difficult for PUMBA to maintain any kind of map control towards the B cap.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we can see that as the render progresses here, there's really not too much to be done here for PUMBA. I mean, they can try to push from C to D, but in the meantime, those Napolis and Marseilles are just going to keep pushing through. And you can see that they basically just completely roll up PUMBA like a carpet here almost.
Yeah, they lost all map control before they actually lost their home cap, which is a funny one. But anyway, I think 3XWD played this one flawlessly. I really, really enjoyed watching this game. The strategy that they played was flawless, in my opinion. And I would be very curious if they attempt to replicate this same sort of strategy or even the exact same one in a future game, because should be a pretty interesting showdown in case someone has already seen the strategy being played out. How are they going to adapt around it?
Yep, and it is good to note that strategies like that can be relatively flexible too, where you
can go very quickly through it because we are waiting, keeping the teams waiting. All right, let's go.
All right, we can see that initial deployment here from the triple Marceaus backed up by the Svea going for the A cap. The Gdansk does manage to slow it down, and this is actually a very smart play from him, using this island as a buffer. So that in case he's radared by Svea, for example, he can just retreat behind the island and not die to triple Marceau.
Yes.
So very smart early play from him. And again, the Ragnar Stalingrad combination on B, also very effective against Marceaus. Marceau HE, unless they're running IFHE, which I assume they're probably not, can be shattered by the Ragnar armor plating, and the Stalingrad ballistics are very good. So I would say pretty strong early deployment here from ATFD. But again, Rain just has so much flexibility with this composition, and we can see the rotations already happening here, with the double Marceau going towards B, backed up by the Svea on the rock.
Yeah, this is honestly classic Rain Destroyer Wolfpack tactics, where they choose to basically bunch them up all together at the start of the game, rush down a cap. In this case, it was the A cap. And then immediately after they get the cap, they split them up into 2 groups, where one of them will go over either to the middle cap or go off, even rotate to the other side of the map completely, and then take it. In this case, they are rotating to the middle. We are like 3.5 minutes into the game. You already have a cap, and you're rotating your main force away from the cap that you deployed to originally, which shows the dynamic play style that you can have when you have fast ships that can play in basically any position.
Yeah, it's interesting to note. I think this is a very dynamic composition, like you mentioned, but it's almost like a mix between like a nice control setup with the radars from the Svea and also an aggressive composition with the triple Marceaus. But I wouldn't really say it's as much of a push composition because it's really hard to actually push through cruisers with the Marceaus. So it's a very aggressive take on, I think, what is more of a control comp.
Yeah, definitely. I think the pushing comms in this game, in our game, are mostly based around a lot of HP. You need that HP as brute force mechanism to basically make sure that you have enough time while you sit in the enemy team's phase to make that push happen. When you have such a light composition, especially when you have 2 Sveas and 3 Marceaus as your main force that is moving around the map, going for caps, doing the main fights, they have very little HP in comparison to, let's say, 2 Stalingrads and San Martin. These ships are way more tanky. If you ever want to make a push, you definitely want that extra HP.
Yeah. And you can see Rain's game plan here basically being to control the A and B caps, actually rotating out whichever Marceau is capping, so they spread the HP, which is a very good play from them. You definitely want to be spreading the damage taken along your destroyers. But ATFD does have pretty good reactions. I mean, moving up the San Martin Gdansk along the 1-2 line here is very good to be putting pressure onto the Rain side. And again, taking the C cap. They will have a hard time keeping it because of the Delny, of course. But again, at this point, I think the match is still pretty much even. But we'll see the Rain basically manages to take a lot of HP off the Gdansk, which will basically be fatal for it once it actually goes into A. You can see the San Martin gets forced away. The Gdansk goes for A anyways, even though his support has been forced off a little bit. And then the rotation of the Marceau from B to A, I think ends up getting that Gdansk killed once the Svea pushes back in with the radar. And then after that goes down, Rain has very solid control over AB. The Delny sitting on the rock on C is very problematic for ATFD, just permanently freezing the cap. Because they don't have B control, they don't have any way to actually shoot at it. And then the Schlieffen tries to do something and just ends up dying.
Yeah, so the Schlieffen pushing into a 3-way crossfire with the Salem and the 2 Libertards and potentially the Delny with the Torps and the guns as well. He was really doomed from the very beginning going for that push, but they had to do something in that case because they were going to lose anyway, and the decision to push kind of solidified their loss because the kill got trained to 1,000 points.
All right, well, our teams are ready. We'll be... And why don't you go ahead and take us away, Baz? So as the Rain man on the inside, you definitely expected this Svea pick?
Yes, I did. I know that they definitely like it a lot, and they have been practicing with it as well. So not surprised to see a couple of them being sprinkled into the comms as we watch the first 2 games from them, at least today. Maybe we'll see more of it tomorrow, but it's been very interesting to see them play it because it would not have been my first take on it as well. I might have used them in a slightly different way of maybe replacing a Brisbane with it, essentially, to play it more as an anchor around the cap.
Play them in combination with the smoke screen, use them for cap control.
Essentially. But the way they are playing it is also very interesting because they're using it as a pseudo-destroyer of sorts, where you're able to rotate around the map very effectively and be a threat even if the damage output as a single Svea is not super high, but at least it's very effective.
Yeah, I think we've seen them use them as essentially very beefed up jacks of all trades, where they're using them as like a weak side cruiser here after their stuff rotates. They're using it to help control the middle of the map here. And we see also the torpedoes from this Svea be relatively impactful too, versus ships trying to push into them. So it has the super accuracy on the guns, it has the radar, it has the smoke, it has the mobility, it has the torpedoes to threaten things. It really does a lot of jobs all at once, and you can see there on the 1 line that Rain does leave their Svea there. And honestly, San Martin versus Svea is a matchup that I would have favored San Martin.
Yeah.
At least just by eyeballing it, but I think in both of these games, we actually have seen the Svea come out on top.
Yeah, I think the main positive thing for Svea versus San Martin matchup is when you face off against San Martin, he really has to get those shell hits on you. And as a Svea, you can always smoke up and disengage right as you're about to give him the combat instructions. And if he doesn't hit you for like 10 or 15 seconds, he starts losing all that progress.
Yeah.
And I think he might have been caught out where his consumables are now on cooldown and he does not have the ability to charge that combat instruction up, and then is like in a position where you have to wait it out before you make that play. When like San Martin in general is very tanky as long as you get to charge the
You have to
combat
be constantly
instructions.
shooting, constantly hitting those shells. And like you mentioned, with the Svea having the smoke generator, having the speed boost, being a small target, it can be difficult to make that happen. In terms of the home cap push here, you can see the Colombo going down. Again, Rain being very comfortable in just kiting backwards, giving up the space and just doing damage while they do that, because they know that they have map control on the other side. So it's actually not as important for them to really hold the home cap, so to say. They're very comfortable just moving away from it, making sure they get the favorable HP trades, and then collapsing back on once they've finished the Colombo. And again, that San Martin trying to make the push against the Svea. You can see the smoke screen come out from the Svea there for the quick disengage and handles that kill pretty cleanly. So
Yep.
I think overall, Svea turning out to be a little bit stronger than I expected.
Yes.
I did think it had
Definitely.
potential as a pick. I wasn't expecting it to be maybe even like a double pick, but Rain has been showing very strong use of it. So definitely excited to see how it evolves throughout the tournament here.
Yeah, I'm wondering if this is just early adapters of the meta, or if there is something that they have discovered which other people haven't yet. Or if this is just like, oh, it's a new thing that people don't know how to play against yet.
Right.
So it's always an interesting one when there is a new ship or a new meta developing. Is it just like, oh, it's strong and that's why we're playing it, or people don't know how to play against it, that's why we're playing it.
Especially when it can be something so useful in terms of the tools it carries. It can be very difficult for teams to figure out how to use it and also how to play against it.
Definitely.
So definitely before we move into the next game, and we can see exactly how much work this Incomparable on EPOXY's side put into this match. So right off the bat, kind of what we talked about prior to the game starting here, just to go over it very quickly, you see that most teams will opt to send most of their forces towards the middle and the west side of the map, and they will actually just send more of a lighter force towards D. It will be a little bit harder to push through the D cap at the start of the game since teams do spawn in the east. So if you try a heavy push, it's very quick for teams to rotate back and be able to defend. But at the start of the game here, the Svea pick, I think one of Baz's favorites here, unfortunately does not do as much work in this game because of that salvo from Incomparable.
Yeah.
He was in his smoke screen, but maybe smoked up just a little bit too late. Wasn't able to dodge the salvo and is just removed from the game with just 1 or 2 shells.
Yeah, I think he was spotted by the daring, smoked up a bit too late, maybe overestimating his survivability. I think he got shot by the Moskva once, the Incomp once, and the Schlieffen once, and then just goes down. So quite interesting one with that.
All right, and then as we play it forward here, I think after that first ship loss, it's pretty hard for KSM to find a way back into the game, especially with the ship composition that they've planned out here. Again, we see the double Napoli, the Colombo, the Shimakaze trying to push down the west side, but kind of stopped in their tracks by the Des Moines just going to the rock here and catching the Shimakaze in its radar.
Yeah, I think the Shima might have maybe overplayed his side. Generally, you don't want to go that close to the rock, especially when you know that there is potentially a radar there. We hadn't seen the Des Moines from EPOXY until that point where he got spotted and then he radared the Shimakaze. So generally as a destroyer player, especially a top destroyer player, you want to make sure that you are knowing where the radars are before you commit to any sort of push play where you actually go and scout people
I think
out.
this definitely could have been a case where maybe after losing the Svea and the C cap, KSM is feeling the pressure to make something happen and maybe calls their push on the west side a little bit too quickly.
Yeah.
But after getting the Shima caught out and the pretty dominant positions here on the map from EPOXY, it would take a miracle for KSM to get back into the game. So you can watch the vendor progress here as EPOXY basically wipes up the map. Not too much there left to do for KSM. But we'll be moving into the game number 2 on Land of Fire here. KSM with their backs against the wall, if they lose this map, they will be eliminated. So why don't we go ahead and throw it to our introduction for Land of Fire, and then we'll be in game 2. Because it really is an incredible accomplishment. So going off the start here, you can see EPOXY basically taking a page out of the Rain playbook here, bringing the 3 triple French destroyers out towards A, fast capping that, And then at this point, I think the rotation is an okay call to make. They're bringing their 2 Clevers to B. They don't have a lot of information still at this stage of the match. Just looking for that kiting ship on the 1 line as well. But KSM setting up for their push here. And we'll see in just a moment that it doesn't really start very well for them.
Yeah, I think the important thing here to notice is that EPOXY has a lot of info at this point about what the KSM ships are doing. They have a very deep Kleber on the 1 line, which basically means that there is nothing on this whole part of the map.
Yeah, and especially when
which
you
means
see the
that they're
Napoli.
just not going to be playing there, right?
Yeah, and when you see this Napoli next to that rock kiting away, that's a very good indicator that this is KSM's weak side.
Yeah, definitely. And once you see this, you should be in a position where you can make the call, okay, it's time to either push through A or start rotating everything back.
Right.
And I think the decision that was made was partially correct, where they left one Kleber to hang out behind A to just make sure that no one takes it and rotate the other 2 back. But I think they should have actually, what they should have done is actually followed through and making sure that this Napoli goes down, because at the end of the game, he was still alive with like 5k HP remaining. And then the 2 Klebers that are going to middle right now, they do end up flipping the cap in the mid game a little for like about 3 or 4 minutes. But then they lose it to the Colombo walking in. And I think at that point, they should have just realized, okay, it's time to give up this cap and rotate to home to make sure that they can secure the kills on the 2 Napolis and the Vincent that are pushing in.
Yeah, and I definitely feel like when you're bringing something like a Kleber pair, you don't really want to keep them in the same position in the middle of the map here for most of the match. You either get your goal, you accomplish it, and then you move on, or you find something else to do. So we can see as the match progresses here, that push coming down the 10 line in front of the Daring is going to eat some of those nasty torpedoes here in just a moment.
Yeah, I think this is where I highlighted why the Schlieffen actually. I think the Schlieffen being in this position is actually a bit of a big misplay.
Sure.
Where in this case, if he was maybe 5 kilometers towards the 10 line on this area instead, he would have been in a much better position to actually stop any sort of push, because the Daring can torp down this line and then the Schlieffen can hold down this line. So both ways are then protected for the Salem, and the Salem can still exist because he'll be the main person who can actually defend the sea cap.
Yeah, the key thing is you need to find a way to punish the ships coming around the rock, because if they make it around the rock without getting punished, then you're in an open water fight, which is a pretty big problem for you. Fighting against 2 Napolis and a Vincent is never a good time. But you can see they're picking up the Salem despite eating those torpedoes. The Marceau doing a lot of damage to the Daring as well. And at this point, we can see those 2 Klebers are actually still in the middle of the map. Getting the cap is fine. But at this point, I think you have to realize that you're playing against a Radar Bender, you're playing against a Daring, you're playing against a Colombo. You don't really have a lot of great answers to them, especially now that the Incomparable is also taking a lot of damage. So I would have loved to see a rotation at this point, maybe to either instantly go over towards C&D and help pick up these caps and kills, or maybe try to go south to maybe help finish that Napoli.
Yep.
But unfortunately for EPOXY, they're not really able to do much here with their Klebers. That Napoli does escape on the border with most of his HP, despite eating some torpedoes, and then at the end, KSM just ticks up on that triple cap.
Yep.
And we can see the 2 Klebers are still in the middle of the map, so
yeah,
definitely would have
think
liked to see
there
a little
was
bit more
definitely
rotational play.
more things that the Klebers could have achieved throughout this game. I really like seeing Klebers especially be a bit more active, try to utilize that speed for rotations. You can obviously go for the early game, fast A take or C take, whatever you would like to do. But then the mid game rotations are really the key for having success with the Kleber composition.
Right. I think what we maybe saw is that EPOXY has a pretty strong early game plan here with their Klebers, but then after the early game is over, they don't seem to have a good idea of where they want their Klebers to go afterwards.
Yeah, definitely.
Where they run into that Minotaur radar wall at B, and then just kind of fiddle around the cap. All right, on to Shatter here. And Baz, why don't you take us away? Again, that very aggressive Marseille-Napoli push that we've seen KSM utilize to good effect in game 1 and 2, albeit with only Napolis. This time they're bringing out the Marseille. Pausing here, do you think there's a difference with Marseille that would make them bring it on this map as opposed to just more Napolis?
I think Marseille's speed compared to Napoli is definitely one reason to bring it over Napoli. Napoli obviously has way more survivability. Sorry. In the sense that you have a smoke to disengage with, as well as the improved armor scheme where you basically are unlikely to be citadeled by cruisers. But in this case, I think the Marseille pick was definitely the better pick because they were always planning to run it down a flank. In that case, I think Napoli doesn't do as well purely because of the lack of speed.
Right, so the Marseille speed boost lets it get out onto this flank position a little bit sooner, and then I would say it also has a lot more long-range firepower, having those 9 very large guns. And we can see at the start here that the Marseille is firing AP, actually putting the Epoxy Schlieffen here into a crossfire with all of their ships through the channel here.
Yeah.
So that is a pretty strong early game play for them, getting the Schlieffen out of the game almost immediately, in combination with the Shimakaze torps as well.
Yeah, I think what's also important to highlight is while they were focusing on the Schlieffen, they're also creating a lot of pressure on this Moscow actually.
Right.
Because with the Marseilles being on the 10 line from this sort of position, they have a really good crossfire over here that is built up with the Schlieffen and the Moskvas and all of the other ships that are from the middle of the map here. So the Moscow actually going for the island because he's slightly late. He's actually in a lot of threat of getting crossfired and just dying.
Right.
Luckily, in this case, I think they were too busy focusing the Schlieffen and didn't really get a chance to.
One of the problems for them is that when the Moskva is angling down towards the island like this, he's pretty much committed.
Yes.
And when you're in a Moskva and you see that there's 2 Schlieffens in front of you, there's 2 Marseilles pushing the flank, that's probably not a position you want to be in.
No.
So unfortunately for Epoxy, the Moskva is committed here. He's not going to be able to get away. And they also only have the Salem on the rock here to contend with the 2 Marseilles. And like Zui mentioned, I believe, the Salem was not running IFHE, which means that he's going to have a very hard time actually doing damage to the Marseilles because of their 38mm deck.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Marseille is a ship that actually does really well against Salem as well. Salem is a ship that generally excels at dueling other cruisers. But in this case, because it's 2 Marseilles, you can actually just brute force it through the amount of HP and the amount of damage output you have as a Marseille pair. You can just win out this sort of trade. And they definitely showcased that later on when the Salem actually had to back off from the trade. They just decided, okay, it's time to go. And they just pushed through. They were actually tanking the Moscow and the Daring throughout all of that. And they made the push work anyway.
Yep, so why don't we go ahead and play it through here. You can see that the Schlieffen does start to go down very quickly there, tries to get off the rock, but is not able to. The Moskva opts to turn away and try to run away. But again, he's just at that point too committed, too close, does go down. And again, that Salem on the rock here, even though Salem does have a lot of close range DPM, it's one of the highest DPM heavy cruisers in the game, it just does not have enough applied damage against Marseille.
Yep.
And you can see that even with the support of the Daring, he's not really able to do much here. The 2 Marseilles just walk him over. And at this point, Epoxy has a really hard task ahead of them. They have a lot of HP to contend with. They don't really have the ships to do it with. And KSM has huge map control here.
Yeah, definitely. I think from this sort of position, it's almost impossible to come back. Primarily because with the way the ships are positioned, unless you get a freak dev strike on one of these ships, it's probably unlikely they will have the ship presence, the HP, or the map position to actually convert any of these caps back into their favor.
All right, so why don't we go ahead and play it through here, and we'll see that KSM is basically able to just kind of consolidate all their ships into the middle of the map. Like Orcaster's mentioned, this is a pretty rare thing to see. Just putting all your ships in one blob, but keep in mind that the only ships that they really have to contend with now is the Kremlin and the Worcester. The Darings are very hard to spot. The Shima's probably not going to get himself lit except by the radar. So KSM just blobbing all their ships together to focus all their firepower on the remaining ships on Epoxy's side.
Yep.
And from here, it's basically just a done deal. The Schlieffen walks into the Kremlin, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I mean, well played by KSM. They clearly had a strategy pre-prepared for this map, especially with the ship bans that they made, and they executed it very well. I didn't really have any big criticisms compared to the first game where there was clearly some issues in terms of positioning, but just well played. Like to see what they have cooked for the other maps in the future. I believe they are going to be actually playing the #1 team on China, TIVAT, as their next game. So I'm sure that's going to be a very spicy one as well. Unfortunately, we won't be able to see that as we are going to go into, I believe, interesting one because, again, it's the same sort of thing as previous regional clashes where you don't really know what you are going to play when you are always playing them or scrimming against them in the regionals. And then when you start playing them as a big tournament comes up, you really want to save those strats. So I'm curious of what they actually played here.
Also interested in how these teams approach North here, since I think we've only seen this map one time so far in the tournament, where I believe it was PUMBA brought a very aggressive Russian or Soviet push strategy to the CCAP. It looks like both teams here may be playing a little bit more of a control setup.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I like the two Delnis that are basically mirroring each other on the E-cap. while there's a shimmer from the ATFD side actually going immediately for the B cap and then trying to go for probably a spotting play is my guess, with the AB side for them being the kiting flank. What is also interesting to note is that it looks like a Harugumo Minotaur radar pairing that is playing the AB side from RSTC, which is usually not the case.
Yeah, that probably indicates a Brisbane game.
Yeah, I'm guessing the Brisbane was banned from one of these teams. We can have a little quick overview about the ship bans after this render, but overall, this deployment from both teams looks actually fairly sane and looks like mostly just a control strat for now, where they were just playing to see who makes the first mistake.
All right, why don't we go ahead and play it out here? You can see that, again, when you have the 5 caps, you have to spread your team a little bit thin across the map here. So both teams opting to go for a pretty even spread instead of going for a singular push on one side of the map. Just a lot of trading happening. It looks like ATFD does have the stronger setup to push RSTC out of the E cap here. And then I think as this position collapses, this Masa will be quite at risk. And it looks like maybe the Harugumo Minotaur will try to get something done versus the San Martin here, but I would expect that to be a very difficult push.
Yeah, that's going to be a difficult one, I would say, because we just saw the Minotaur also raid at the Shimakaze, which means that the Minos radar is on cooldown for the time being. And the San Martin got a few salvos into the Minotaur after the radar was off, but there's unlikely to be any kills happening on this side of the map unless there's like some miracle torbs coming in. In general, this is going to be mostly a stalemate side.
Yeah.
San Martin will just kite away, try to get his combat instructions charged up whenever he can. If not, he's just going to kite away and let his consumables cool.
And I would say at this point in the match, we probably have a race to basically dislodge one of these Masas.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'm mostly looking for what happens with the Moscow trade, and after that, what both teams are doing with their battleships that are in the middle. So we have a Libertad from ATFD and a St. Vincent that is from RSTC just hanging out somewhere in the middle around the C cap and the D cap. Maybe they'll have a impact on the game by pushing through. We'll see.
All right. So let's see who manages to kill the Masa first here. You can see the Delny Libertad Ragnar kind of forced away there, but the Minotaur Harugumo push actually getting a lot of damage off the Shimakaze here. Des Moines actually pushing through middle. Looks like RSTC, as they lose the east side of the map, opting to redeploy most of their ships into the center here. But they're taking a lot of damage. It looks like the Masa is about to go down. So I think my prediction at this point would be that ATFD probably has a stronger position.
Yes.
I think as we play it out here, the Masa goes down. The Des Moines almost survives, but does not. And then ATFD just takes it away.
Yeah, I think the kill trading was definitely very well done by ATFD. They managed the HP on the ships fairly well. As you can see at the end, like most of their ships are about half HP, but none of them is going to die anytime soon. The Moskva is the only one who's actually in threat of dying, and based on the points, it was mostly a kill game. When the caps are mostly equal, you generally want to make sure that you're trading positively, if at all. And in general, this looks like a game where that the kill that happened on the E cap at the very start of the game was maybe one of the deciders about who was going to win the game once the trading continued. All
right, well, our next match is in about 12 minutes, so I think now that the voting is complete, we can take a look at the bans, the picks, and so on and so forth for TSMYQ versus JC.
Because I think this is going to be an interesting one in terms of how the TSMYQ ships actually position themselves to receive a push or make a push happen themselves.
All right, we can take a look at the initial deployments here. TSMYQ again, somewhat balanced at the early game here, actually sending the Delny, the Harugumo, and the Salem out towards A. Just the Delny, Salem, and St. Vincent to hold down their home cap here. But you'll see the positions, the rotations change a little bit as they actually spot this push coming. So again, Delny pushing out the one line here, Salem taking the rock. And at this point, TSMYQ starts making their decisions.
Yeah,
so you can see that they push down here on the 10 line. They recognize that those ships are there. They know that they're probably about to lose their home cap with the Libertad and Daring pushing in. And you're going to see them probably start to rotate these middle ships in towards D-cap to start bringing some extra firepower to bear and trying to convert the kills.
Yeah, I think we've seen a similar sort of play previously, I think yesterday, where we saw double battleship push on the home caps, which did work out for them purely because they had the speed to actually get there. In this case, I think TSMYQ's reaction was so quick that even before the push actually got any footing into the map, they were already prepared. They were ready for what is to come. Like they were going to all push into the cap, they are coming in with 2 Libertads, so it's a lot of secondary power, and they were basically ready for any sort of crazy things happening, and like you can see already that the Vincent is kited out.
Yeah, he's
in a
already
good
running
position
away
on the 10 line, so he's already making a good crossfire with the Salem, and eventually the Colombo will probably go here or go here, and then have a really good crossfire on basically all of this area where you expect a battleship.
And we
to
should
hang
definitely
out.
note here that, like you were circling here, the Salem is pretty much the linchpin of TSYMQ's defense. JC basically has to dig the Salem out if they want to actually be able to successfully convert the home cap push into some kind of advantage. And TSYMQ knows that too, so the St. Vincent kiting away there, making sure that he's not the most viable target, but he's ready to actually shoot any ships that come around on the Salem's nose. And then, like you mentioned, the Colombo and Gdansk coming back and help cover the Salem's rear.
Yeah,
So
I
it's
think
basically about extracting as much damage and kills as they can out of JC in exchange for the Salem dying.
a good example actually for this would be the previous game where we saw Epoxy versus KSM, where we saw the Vincent basically rush a Salem's bow and essentially dev strike him. Which the overmatching capabilities of a Vincent against Salem are definitely very important.
Right, the Vincent having the 30mm overmatch means that anywhere he hits on the Salem's hull will do damage, whereas the Libertad only has the 406mm guns.
Correct. So he can only overmatch the bow of the ship, and while it is 12 guns, they have fairly mediocre accuracy. You're really relying on the secondaries to actually do the damage for you. And against the Salem, obviously it has that brute force in terms of the amount of HP that you have with the super heals. So you are fairly okay to take a bunch of chunk damage. As long as it's not sits, you'll be fine. And in this case, it definitely showed that having a different battleship, even if it's not an overmatching battleship, maybe a Schlieffen would have done better in that situation.
Note that Schlieffen with IFHE actually can pen all of the Salem's hull with its secondaries, which means that it applies all that damage. Whereas again, the Libertad only applies the 234mm guns usually. So you can see the push coming out here. TSYMQ doing a fantastic job of rotating those ships around and applying a lot of damage to both the Libertads, and actually managing to kill both Libertads before their Salem goes down, and even starting to trade out the Salem as well.
Yeah,
so
I think
really
also I would like
here.
to highlight that the Salem actually went through 3 heals during that time where he was getting pushed by both battleships and a cruiser, and he survived because Salem, when you're angled, not eating citadels, is very, very tanky. You have a lot of HP, and you can just survive a storm very easily like that. And you really need to get overmatch or that burst of damage where between cooldowns of heals, you're basically killing him from full to 0.
Yeah, and again, very nice rotations here from TSYMQ, bringing all their ships from the middle into the decap so that they can actually convert all of the kills for JC. I think they actually kill basically every ship on that side that was pushing. JC does respond pretty well by pushing into A and B with their own ships. But TSYMQ is more than happy to give those up temporarily since they have an over 200-point lead at this point in the game. It would take a very long time of JC taking on those caps in order for them to actually have a chance of winning, which TSYMQ was not going to give them an opportunity to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think TSYMQ realized that after the 2 battleships from JC were down, it was a kills game, so the caps didn't really matter for a fairly long amount of time. They could have just make sure that they secure all the kills that are being given to them, that are being fed to them almost. You have like a good 2 to 3 minutes basically before you even have to think about going for the caps.
All right, why don't we go ahead and play this through towards the end here, and then we can take a look at our next map in the series. Again, a pretty brief moment there where JC actually had all 4 caps, but after cleaning up the east side push, I think there's just too many ships left on the board for TSYMQ here. And that Salem actually heroically living until almost the very end of the game there after fighting the Minotaur. Look at the replay render for the match that we just watched, and kind of go over how TSYMQ was able to really, I want to say, dismantle JC in these 2 games.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting watch, especially because they came in with a very set strategy from what it looks like. They had the idea of contesting middle with the Haba at the start, and then they looked like they were already expecting a contest from the enemy team, and as soon as the contest happened, he just left. Yeah. So I'm very curious about how this game actually plays out.
Yeah, I think very good rotational play from TSYMQ here, being willing to recognize that they want to move the Kaba and actually replace his spot with the Minotaur by diving it onto the rock. That can be a risky play, putting the Minotaur on the rock there, but as long as the angles are controlled, it's not too much of a problem. We can see that both teams are pretty evenly split across the map.
Yes.
They're playing very similar strategies. We have the Hargamo smoke screen set up for the Minotaurs on the A cap. We have both teams devoting 2 ships onto the B cap here. And then we have a 3-ship, what looks like they want to push around here. But again, this Salem position here on the D cap is very hard to dig out unless you really fully commit to pushing it. which is a hard call to make, and JC doesn't end up going for it.
Yeah, I
So-
think it's very interesting how the ships on each side, like on the A flank and the B on C, are almost the same. The only difference being the Delny versus the Daring on the C cap, the CDE flank.
Right.
And I think actually the Delny as a kiting ship is doing really well so far.
Yeah, I mean, when you have the islands in the cap to hold your position from, you don't really need the cap contesting ability of the Daring. So you can replace that with the Delny, have a little bit more open water survivability and kiting power, and I think it worked out very well for them.
Yeah,
so
I
we
think
can
there's
see.
also another question from me to you probably.
Sure.
Why do you think they picked a Haba over a Delny to contest the middle of the map?
That is a very interesting one. I think it probably has to be that I think Haberov's has a little bit more torpedo alpha in case he's maybe rushed on the rock. And it also has extra gun power if it runs into a very close range destroyer fight.
Right.
The Delny is a little bit more powerful in the open water because of the longer gun range, as well as the extra maneuverability on the rudder.
Of course.
But for maybe close encounter situations on the B cap, the extra gun from the Haberovsk, as well as those torpedoes, maybe makes a little bit more of a difference. That would be my guess.
That does make a lot of sense. Yeah. Haba has some nuclear torpedoes. Basically, if you have to rush or get rushed, Haba can do a lot more damage compared to a Delny. So I think that actually does line up with my idea as well. So let's.
And
go
as
a
we
bit
move along
further.
through the match here, basically at this point in the match, I think the game comes out to who makes the better trades and who makes the better rotations. And we can see here I think the critical play coming out from TSYMQ. They're willing to move the Minotaur onto the rock here on the B cap, flip that over, and then just move the Haba away. They recognize at this point that the game is basically going to be won by who takes the next engagement on the A cap. So they're going to get ready for that next check by moving the Haberovsk over there, having an extra set of guns, and then really just pushing their advantage, which I think makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that is definitely an interesting one. I also really like the fact that the Haba is basically preparing to do this type of a push, which will go really well if this blob pushes back in.
Right.
And it's going to be very interesting to actually see how this play develops.
Yep. And we can see in the north, there's not a lot happening at the time. The Haberovsk rotating actually also opens a nice angle on the Daring in the middle of the cap. And then here we can see the critical engagement, where as the Haberovsk rotates down into the cap, the smoke train pushes up, and they're very willing to actually just take the radar check.
Yes.
When both the Minotaurs radar each other, it comes a lot basically down to how effective is your support, how much damage can you do, and they do actually a very good job of focusing targets.
Yes.
They actually kill the Haragumo first, which I think is a very good target call. It's very tempting to actually shoot at the Minotaur because you can overmatch it, and one good shot can take it out of the game. But if you don't manage to kill it, it has a super heal.
Yes.
And the Haragumo is a little bit more of a sluggish destroyer. It doesn't have the heal. And if you can take out the Haragumo, the Minotaur doesn't have cover anymore.
Yes, I think the long-term, more effective strategy is to definitely kill the destroyer, because a Minotaur that doesn't have a smoke is gonna suffer in open water generally. And even if it's just 3 destroyers basically running you down, eventually through the HE pressure you will die. Whereas a Haragumo is very hard to catch even if you are alone. So in this case, I do definitely agree with you. The Haragumo target prioritization definitely helped them out here. And I really also like the being okay with taking damage to make a trade happen from TSYMQ. This is generally something that a lot of teams are very scared to take damage, even if they know there's a guaranteed kill available. So I'm very happy to see that they are actually decisive in making that call. It's like, okay, we'll take 20k damage on our Minotaur, but we'll make sure we get that kill.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree here that I think they recognize that they have superior forces in the area. So they recognize that if they take the check, if they're willing to expose their ships to damage, they'll be able to deal a lot more damage in return to JC. And we can see that basically as the match progresses from this point, they just have a lot more firepower concentrated on the A cap, and they're able to basically wipe up the JC ships there.
Yeah.
And that basically does it for the match. JC does do a pretty good job of re-pushing onto the home cap here, but in the end, it's not too impactful. TSYMQ even manages to respond by killing one of the ships there. So in the end, I think the match is basically won off the back of TSYMQ being willing to make that rotational play towards A and doing a fantastic job of just going for the face check.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think overall this game was very well played by TSYMQ. I generally am a big fan going after, like through WMI. They had some very innovative stats, and now in KOTS, they are also showing that they have a really deep strat book, and they're also very willing to make these sorts of trades that other teams may shy away
looks
from.
like not only do they have like a pretty deep strat pool, but they're also very well polished on executing them. So a very nice combination there. That will do it for our match here. I think one of our first 2 zeros that we've cast so far.
Yep.
And very convincing from TSMYQ. So moving forwards, we'll go ahead and take a look at the render here, see if we can pick out any key mistakes on Resin's side here. I did like their early game deployment here, especially towards the east side of the map. They got a very favorable trade onto ATFD's Delny here, opting to bring the 2 of their own and go for that very strong initial engagement, getting half the HP away, but of course Delny does have a heal. We can take a look here. We can see that overall, I would say ATFD does have a little bit of a stronger deployment towards the E cap here. Actually having a Des Moines to put onto the cap is a very strong tool. They do have a Howden Liu to contend with, which can be a big problem for something like a Des Moines sitting on a rock. But unfortunately for Resin, they don't really have a way to keep the Des Moines lit.
Yeah.
Which means that it's actually pretty difficult for the Howden to land bombs on him. So unfortunately, ATFD will be able to get ECAP control here. And then also looking at the rest of the deployment, I would say we have a little bit of a stronger Resin deployment here towards the middle of the map. The Stalingrad being very aggressively on the D cap, the Des Moines being aggressively on the C cap, backed up by the Libertad. I would say gives them a little bit of a better mid-map presence here.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. The only concern I would have, ignoring what actually happened in the game, is if the Libertad from the ATFD side would have reversed a little bit in this position, maybe down to around this area, he would have had second range on this Stalingrad. And based on his current position, he's actually most likely surface spotted by the guys who are sitting on this rock, which, if you're a Stalingrad and you're going to tank the secondaries for a long time, you're going to melt very quickly.
Yeah, but
so it's a dangerous situation.
I do have to mention that if the Libertad does try to go for that play, he does have the Delny and the Libertad of Resin here backing him up. So potentially it could be a little bit of a toss-up as to who actually gets more damage taken there.
Yeah.
But in general, moving along here, we can see ATFD taking that early cap lead and then going. I think I actually really like this initiative of sending their duo here into the Resin duo and just going for the aggressive push, triggering that first radar, then holding onto their radar advantage to take the cap.
Yeah.
So I think this is a very strong play. I think usually teams are very hesitant to actually go for the equal ship matchup and try to do something aggressive. So ATFD being willing to do this, I think, shows a pretty good aggressive mindset.
Yep. Definitely.
So we can see here that after that radar gets used, the Gearing just tanks it, doesn't care too much, and then just heads into the cap. Then we can see the Ragnar and Colombo head into the middle of the map here. And then the Ragnar will actually rotate over as Resin tries to push back onto that duo and basically swing the trade.
Yep. And I think this is where the ATFD Brisbane goes down as well in just a bit. But in that time, they also do really good damage to the Brisbane from
it's
Resin.
basically an
And
equal trade.
1-for-1 Brisbane trade on that side, but then they walk away with a Ragnar Gearing, whereas the other side is a low-ish Delny and a Gearing.
Yep.
So in the grand scheme of things, I would say ATFD might have actually traded positively.
Yeah, the Ragnar is definitely, I would think, the favored ship in that matchup with the 25mm armor and the extra accuracy. Definitely one of the best destroyer duelists in the game. And then you can see, especially on the east side of the map here, ATFD starts to convert that cap control there into a pretty aggressive position. So very well done from them. I think our teams are ready, so we can go ahead and take a quick look at Sleeping Giant. And
Fair.
All right, moving into the game here, I just want to point out again that only 23% of Twitch chatters believed that Resin would carry this game, so happy to say that you are wrong. But like Baz was mentioned, pretty even game at the start, pretty even deployments as well. I think Resin does actually have a little bit of initial advantage in that they're willing to put their Hargumo onto the A cap here. They will flip that early, and then I think the Ragnar will also be able to take B away from ATFD as they rotate their ships over to try to contest the A cap. So a pretty strong early setup from Resin, but of course they have to contend with this push coming in from ATFD on the home caps.
Yeah, I think we kind of briefly pointed out the force from Resin on this 9-10 line was pressured away quite heavily, and you can see why they were pressured away. There was a lot of firepower coming in from ATFD's side. Towards the 9-10 line, they wanted to make a home cap push, and they definitely achieved it fairly decisively, even at the start of the game, where they pushed them away. But it's really commendable from Resin that they gave up that ground, that map control, to make sure that they survive with a good amount of HP. And actually have that HP available to make the repush happen later in the game.
We've talked about this a lot on these 4-cap layouts, where it's pretty easy to make those home-to-home pushes, and the way that you receive that is just by giving up the ground. You want to preserve your HP, you want to preserve your ships. If you try to meet the push with your inferior forces when you're outnumbered, and you lose a ship as well as losing the home cap, that is a disaster.
Yeah,
but if you can keep your ships alive, give up the cap, and then repush later, it's not as much of a problem.
Yep.
So as we move into the game here, We'll see RESIN take that 3-cap lead and then very smartly kind of give up the ground on the A-cap as well. But really, I think where it starts to go badly for RESIN is as this ATFD push materializes on the east side of the map. And you can see some trading going on as well, but the Yo-Yang is able to just flip the D-cap eventually. But I also want to point out at this stage of the map that ATFD is able to put the San Martin onto A, which is a pretty big thorn in the side for RESIN because it's actually very hard to dig that position out without any battleship support.
Yeah, definitely. I think the fact of it is that they managed to pick up a fairly early and, I mean, I would say even straightforward kill on ATFD's battleship that was behind the A-cap. And with that ship being dead, ATFD actually having the ability to put a ship into the A-cap is kind of scary.
Right.
Because you are technically winning the flank by getting a kill on there, but then you have a guy just walking into the cap.
You have a San Martin at close range that has the torpedoes, that has the AP with the improved penetration angles against a Brisbane Harugumo Ragnar. And none of those ships are really capable of actually coming around the corner on the San Martin and killing him. So very big problem there for RESIN, and very smart play from ATFE to do that. And then you basically have this big push materialize on the home caps, which is able to start doing a lot of damage to the Stalingrad, converting that kill. And again, you can see that the RESIN ships have basically kited into the far corner of the map here, where they basically have no map presence. And at this point, it's a pretty big problem for RESIN, and that even though they have an almost 200 point lead, they can't deal with the San Martin. 3 of their ships are almost off the map, and they're going to be losing the Stalingrad.
Yeah, I think there's also interesting to point out that the Montana from RESIN is actually in a really strong position in the middle of the map. I think he got some really nice crossfires into the San Martin while he was pushing into the A-cap, which is why he's so low, and eventually was also partially the reason behind why the San Martin did go down there. If there was no BB crossfire.
If the San Martin was full HP, then the Ragnar Harugumo
just doesn't die.
The Harugumo Ragnar would probably not have been able to finish off the San Martin. So as we play the match forward a little bit here, you can see that Stalingrad go down, and RESIN now in a little bit of a dire position here. Even though they do manage to get the San Martin, they trade out the Ragnar for it. So overall, that's not too bad of a thing for ATFD. And still 100 points up, but again, their ships are still below the eye line here. So it's going to take a long time for them to get back into the game. And we have 4 ATFD ships in the middle of the map here, putting fire onto the Stalingrad Montana, and with the deep waters coming in. So this is really the crucial moment in the match here, I would say. The fact that the Montana is able to get away without dying is a big win for RESIN. And then the ships manage to push back in on the east side of the map just in time to pick up that Stalingrad, freeze the cap, and take over to 1,000 points with less than 46 points to win for ATFD.
Yeah, it's such a close game. I think in the end, there was actually a big salvo from the St. Vincent that was coming back from having to kite away for a majority of the game. And then he got a fairly hefty salvo into the Stalin's broadside. And then they were able to finish him off, which really sealed the deal. And up till that point, they were both like maybe 20 points apart, which is a really close game and very volatile, because the first person to basically get a kill is going to win. And both teams technically had a kill available, but RESIN just sealing the deal with that nice
RESIN clutched it out first here, and we'll be moving on into the quarterfinals as the last hope for North America. So very happy to see an NA team still make it this far. Let's take a look here. Again, I think we're going to see a very strong early deployment here from Tito Yue. Again, the Haberos pick, so rare for a team like Tito Yue to bring. Like Baz mentioned, might have been better as a Delny, but taking that super aggressive line, this is something that a lot of teams will usually be very hesitant to do. But this indicates that Tito Yue has a really good read on the initial lineup, that they're comfortable probably adjusting their plans on the fly, and that they're willing to make this kind of call. So the Haberos going super aggressively here to catch the Ragnar. Haber versus Ragnar, kind of a bit of a toss-up. If the Ragnar shows side, the Khabarovsk AP can do a ton of damage to it. But if it angles, the Cap can have a pretty tough time actually dealing damage to it.
Yeah, I think it's very similar in terms of the amount of armor both of these destroyers have, that if you load HE against each other, you're not really penning each other. But if you load AP and you're giving broadside, you're obviously going to be doing a lot of damage. I think I kind of give the edge to the Ragnar here, purely because you have that a slightly better accuracy compared to a Haba.
The better accuracy as well as the better maneuverability.
May help. Yeah, that I think that might be slightly favoring the Ragnar, but I think in this situation, with the Petro backing him up, I think the Haba was definitely the less favored one in this engagement. But regardless, I really love the idea that they had with sending a Hubba down immediately to make sure that the decap actually remains uncapped for the time being.
Yeah, and it worked very well.
And I think they were the first ones to actually take the cap, because later on you see a Salem just go down and just sit on this rock.
Yep,
which
exactly.
is quite interesting.
For the rest of the initial deployment, we see, I think, TIVAT has a much stronger presence in the middle of the map here, with the Petro taking this very traditional spot on the rock here, offering very good control over the B cap, and then also being very aggressive with their Petro and St. Vincent on A.
Yep.
And that basically kind of locks Rain out of, again, like Robin was saying, 3/4 of the map here, which is a pretty big problem for them. But Rain, again, very flexible team, very used to making calls on the fly, is able to kind of shift their ships around. Like we'll see, like Baz mentioned before we got into the vendor, moving the Delny and the Ragnar from the 1-2 line all the way back towards their home cap there is a play that a lot of teams will usually not make because it takes so long. But Rain sees the necessity, knows that those are the best ships to rotate, and does it.
Yeah, exactly. I think there is an important thing to notice here is that the game is less than 5 minutes in. You are like 4 minutes in, you see the initial deployment from TWA. They're putting their Petros in their strong positions, like here behind the A cap, here behind the B cap. These are definitely positions where the Petro shines in. They are very hard to dig a Petro out of. And they realize, okay, we're not going to be able to take A and B at least at the start of the game. Let's just rotate. We don't need to waste our resources here. So let's make the call. Leave some ships behind so that they don't push through, which was the Petro in this case. And they rotate the 2 destroyers all the way back to the home caps, as well as the Ragnar actually goes closer to B to help out with the Ragnar kill. So all of this was decided fairly early on, as soon as they saw the initial deployment. And this is some heads up gaming that you really need to bring out against TWA, because this is a team that if you make a mistake of even a small scale, they will punish you for it.
Yeah, and I want to point out though that this actually does rely on Rain being able to pick up the kills. At this point, TIVAT has a much stronger map position, and if Rain isn't able to convert the kills, this goes very badly for them. But fortunately, TIVAT does overextend a little bit on the east side of the map especially, and we'll see those plays start to come out here. And again, Rain being forced away, almost losing Intaro's Ragnar, John the Ruthless and Svea in the middle also taking a lot of damage, but as the ships line up here, you can see that Rain is ready for a pretty good repush onto their home cap from this position.
Yep. I think the overall rotation was very well executed, and they didn't really sacrifice too much HP or map position while doing it. Sure, they're bleeding a bunch of points. They're about 120 points or 100 points down at this point. But in terms of the map positioning and having a kill over TWA this early on is really good.
Yeah, like you mentioned, picking that Ragnar up in the middle is hugely important for them.
Absolutely.
Did they land a torpedo on it?
No, it was just a shell damage. The Ragnar plus the Svea at close range, especially, Svea has destroyer accuracy. So it does a really good amount of damage to any destroyer, even if it's a Ragnar. It doesn't really matter that much.
Yep, so excellent kills there coming out from Rain and getting ready for the repush here. Also making sure that TWA isn't able to actually push through on the A cap here is pretty important. Like you said, leaving the Petro, leaving the Svea, and then having the Bungo in the middle of the map ready to push into B and actually kind of open up that position is also pretty important for Rain.
Yeah.
Decides to book it north instead of staying at the same rock at E4.
I think after the Ragnar dies, TWA recognizes that they're probably not going to be able to flip B. So by leaving the rock here, he's probably looking to get his guns over towards the ships over here, or also maybe be able to rotate over towards the east side of the map if that's necessary.
Yeah, I think the correct play, which is what they went for as well, which is to actually rotate him back to the CD side, because they realize that the Hubba is probably going to go down, the Salem is probably going to go down eventually.
Right, after the Hubba dies, the Salem has nothing to protect him.
Exactly.
So they'll basically need something to try to help kill the Conqueror as it pushes him.
Yeah, and it doesn't even have to be the Conqueror actually to kill him. It can just be the Delny that was rotating back. They knew that the Delny had left the A cap a while ago already, so they don't really have any good idea of where he is. And a Delny is still more than capable of rushing a Salem out. So if that's the case, and they think that their home caps are going to fall, rotating a Petro back to defend it makes a lot of sense.
All right. Let's go ahead and play it out here. We can see that the Kaba actually does go down. That was a very important kill for Rain. It actually almost got away. And then they make the split second decision to actually push the Conqueror onto the Salem. They recognize they have to pick that up. And then from here, they can clean up the Harugumo kill and keep pushing through. But even though TWA only has 4 ships left in play to Rain's 6 here, they're still up 230 points, just about. And I think they actually still have a reasonable chance of making this match happen.
Yeah, definitely.
The main way for them to win here is to try to kill one of the range ships that's going to step onto B here. They still have Shimakaze Torps, they still have the St. Vincent, they still have 2 Petros, all of which offer a lot of strong crossfire. So Rain at this point basically has to make that play. TWA knows that they have to make it and they'll set up for it. But Rain's execution is very good here. The Bungo does push up, the Petro gets caught in the crossfire as well with 4 Amazing's Petro on the 1-2 line, and then goes down to the Bungo HE. So very decisive game here at the end. But so many moments back and forth at the start and the middle where it could have gone either way, I feel like.
Yeah, definitely. I think this was a really good showing and a really good way to start off our best of 3 between the number 1 EU and number 2 EU teams. And you could even call them number 1 global team and number 2 global team.
Yeah, these are the teams that we usually see in the grand finals facing off against each other. So a little bit of a bloodbath here in the quarterfinals.
Thank you. Okay, so let's just go.
And what a first match here on Warriors Path. To have not seen this map in the tournament so far.
We haven't seen Warriors Path, or at least not on the from the production here in Belgrade. We haven't seen a single Warriors Path be played. And then the first map we play has been the most crazy match we have watched.
And I have to say, for the first 5 to 10 minutes, I was like, oh man, it's the most traditional map. TWA is just strangling Rain out of the match. So boring. And then the last set happened. Do you want to walk us through the initial deployments here, maybe?
Sure. So it looks like a fairly standard deployment from both teams. Rain actually choosing to not have anything in the middle of the map. The B cap is left completely open.
Yep.
They have a fairly heavy deployment towards C and A. But it looks like the A cap is mostly just a kiting flank for the time being. They saw the gearing drop a smoke for the Worcester, which signals that they definitely don't want to go face check a Worcester in a smoke, because that's obviously going to be very bad for your health as a destroyer. And so they're just chilling for the time being, and they're fighting over the C cap fairly aggressively. And this is also when we saw the Ragnar from TWA actually go very low. I think he went down to like 5,000 HP. And he luckily survived, which is good, but the blind fire out of Rain, even on him, even at the start of the game, was fairly impressive.
It was quite impressive. I think for a full 10 to 20 seconds after he went dark, he kept taking damage there. And you can see that coming now. He actually drops about a quarter of his HP there, well, dark.
Yep.
So Rain, with the very heavy split here towards C and A, does get very quick C control, but TWA responds by taking that B cap with the Ragnar, knowing that it's free.
Yep.
They'll just take that away. And then, of course, the open water smoke train that they are so known for. Rain doesn't really have a solid answer to it at A, despite committing 4 ships there.
Yep.
The Shimakaze does face check the Worcester radar, eats most of his HP there. And then at this point, Rain basically has to find a way to try to control the B cap.
Yep.
But with the ships on the board, it's very hard for them to actually do that.
Yeah, definitely. I think the initial deployment and the cap trades as well as the ship HP trades looked pretty equal, but overall when the caps went to each team, AB going to TWA, they both of those caps looked under like full lockdown. A especially was basically impossible for Rain to ever touch until the super late
just
game.
The fact that TWA is bringing the smoke train and then Rain is not bringing their own smoke radar combination means that they have to give up that map space.
Exactly. And Sheep going down fairly low. I think he was down to 4k or 5k HP after like fairly early in the game, means that him having to play fairly passive if he gets caught by any more radars, because there's 2 Ragnars on the field as well as a Soya.
Yeah, he makes one bad check and he's going to die.
Yeah, exactly. You miss positions even slightly, you get caught by a radar, you're probably going to die in a Shimakaze. So he needs to play very safe.
All right, and then as the match progresses here, you can see Rain starts to set up for that B contest, brings the Daring over, backed up by the Petro and the Vermont, but TWA have a pretty good stranglehold on it. I think, like Robin said, a titanium grip on the map here, bringing a Mosfa, the Ragnar, the Colombo, the Delny, all here to support and be able to put fire onto the Daring position as he tries to reverse into the cap. So at this point, Rain really needs to make a miracle happen.
Yeah, definitely. I think at this point in the game, it looks super bleak. They're down by about 200 points, which being about 10 minutes or 9 minutes into the game is fairly big. You don't really want to let it slip too much.
And I think at this point, that basically gives TWA about a 2.5 minute timer to win the match, which is not a lot of time to make plays happen. So we can see here as they try to contest, the Daring takes the check a couple of times, loses a lot of HP, and then I think Rain at this point realizes that they need to do something drastic because just reversing into the cap hasn't been working. So we see John the Ruthless here actually make his play on towards the A cap. Face checks the Worcester with the radar. They do a ton of damage to it. and actually managed to pick up that kill.
Yeah, the combined firepower of the Delny and the Swea, I guess the Worcester just did not respect it. He gave maybe a bit too much broadside to the Delny and just tanked too much HE pressure from the Swea. And eventually he just goes down. And this was definitely something that we kind of missed during the cast because it was something that happened so quickly as well.
Yeah, like John made that split-second decision to push, went down for it, picked up the Worcester kill, and at this point, T2A was actually only 80 points away from winning the match.
Yeah.
So very vital for them to actually pick up this Worcester kill, give themselves a little bit more time to play with. And then you can see already the T2A battleships positioning for their plays. The Bungo getting ready to go down the middle of the map, the Vermont getting ready to push the nose of that Mosfa. So very good decision-making here from Rain, recognizing what they have to do and making it happen. Of course, John the Ruthless does go down to the Loria, but he's done his job. He's bought his team time.
Oh my God.
And then these last few seconds here in the match, the trade's going back and forth. I think we saw again at a point there, T2A was only 20 points from winning the match.
Yeah, and then you get the clutch stops from Gang hitting the gearing on A. Again, look at the points, 975.
Yeah, at this point, T2A is like literally 15 to 20 seconds away from winning the match. Gang hits the clutch torpedoes guided by the Spirit of Bison.
Yep. I mean, at this point in the game, they don't even need to touch the cap. Like, having one cap for TWA is more than enough. Even having 0 caps potentially would have been enough because they might have been able to secure a kill elsewhere. But they decided to go for it anyway. Then the gearing eats torps, and then they're still in the game.
Yep. Crucial kill there for Rain. Gives them time for the Shimakaze to make the rush here out in front of the Loria. And again, like our casters mentioned, Loria only has the 4 guns forward. It's not something like a St. Vincent, which can put all 9 guns on very easily, so it just doesn't have the shell alpha to actually finish off the Shimakaze here, which is super important because you can see those torpedoes come off, just absolutely delete the Loria. And then, of course, the Ragnar takes that massive shot from the Bungo here, and then just gets finished off by Malamu with the clutch shot all the way over through the rock there. So huge plays coming out from the Rain battleships here. Very important at the end of the match.
Absolutely incredible.
All right. I'm not sure there's too much else to say about this match. I mean, I'm going to be watching the replay for this one myself probably later tonight, but wow, what an incredible match. Okay, so I think the last thing to do for today is the giveaways. Just a reminder, we've been giving out those codes throughout the stream, a total of 5.
We
our
have
producer
a
is letting us know.
For the Grim Reaper, I believe.
Yes, last time OHBOY was depicted as a clown. This time they'll be shown as something else.
Yes.
After even more impressive results.
I mean, they're knocking on another #1 team, I think for China. I think they're knocking on TIVAT's door at this point. So I'm sure there's going to be a good one with that as well. I don't know if we'll be able to cast that one because there's, I think, 2 really good games.
We have a hard decision to make for next week, so maybe chat could even throw some recommendations in chat, but we have to choose between, I think, TIVAT versus OHBOY and Rain versus RESIN.
Yeah, so do you want to see the EU versus NA clash, or do you want to see the Grim Reaper basically at this point face off the #1 Chinese team? I'm kind of leaning towards the Grim Reaper.
All right, take us away, Baz. So again, I think a pretty solid early game here from TIVAT. You can see them basically splitting their forces across both sides of the map with a very strong deployment to each side. As we get into the initial trades here, I just want to outline exactly what's going on. You have actually both teams opting to send, again, a pretty significant force down the east side of the map here, with OHBOY planning to play a little bit more of a delaying action on A here with just the Delny. So overall, I actually do like TIVAT's deployment a little bit better. It looks like based on OHBOY's setup, they were maybe expecting something early into the B cap, with the Stalingrad pointing out this way, but it didn't quite happen. But again, you'll see that OHBOY does react very well on the fly to things like this.
Yeah, definitely. I also really like the idea behind these 2 Marceaux that are basically going immediately to contest the home cap of TIVAT. Kind of reminds me of the Haba from TWA that they brought against Rain
on Land of Fire.
On Land of Fire, exactly, to have a disruptive opening. In this case, it didn't really have that big of an effect because the Delny from TIVAT is obviously more than stealthy enough and more than fast enough to get the cap before he got caught. And Delny actually is a ship that doesn't mind getting caught as much, purely because you have a lot of maneuverability, plus that armor plating that can shatter some HE, as well as the heal.
Yep.
So
you basically have the perfect factor to help mitigate any early trades like this.
Exactly.
OHBOY does get a little bit of hit point advantage out of it, but nothing too major like you were saying. and then we'll have that first Des Moines check coming up. Interesting to note the reactions here. As the game progresses, you can see the first smokes starting to go down, and again, TIVAT decides to rotate their Stalingrad and Marceau towards the middle here, and leaving their Des Moines gearing alone, which I think could come back to bite them. I think given the information that they have available, it's a good decision to make, given that they've only seen the Delny on the A cap. So rotating ships in the middle makes sense, but they do get a little bit overconfident there. Now, interesting to note with the two Des Moines here, they're both laying their smokes very aggressively towards the middle of the map here. But the advantage for TIVAT is that they actually have the small island here. That can kind of offer like an escape plan for their Des Moines. If they're smoking it aggressively, it can just go towards that rock and then be safe from any battleship fire, for example, from the Colombo. Whereas there's no such thing for OHBOY on this side of the map.
Yeah, definitely.
So if they want to run away, the Des Moines has to turn around, doesn't have any safe things to go for.
I think there's also the important thing to point out that the Des Moines that is going to get radar from OHBOY, this one, is actually in a three-way crossfire. He's getting crossfired by the Laurier, the Colombo, and probably the Stalingrad from here as well.
Yep.
So it's gonna be, I would say the fact that he survived was fairly lucky. And if he did go down, there may have been some different plays happening from TIVAT, where they played a bit more aggressively for the decap immediately afterwards. But unfortunately, that does not happen. So you can see exactly what happens in the rest of the match. But I think after the initial lack of kill, and then the counter push happening towards the A side from the Delny against the gearing, it looked fairly bleak.
Yeah, I want to say again, you can see that the TIVAT Des Moines actually does choose to basically not leave the smoke screen here. I think that if he had chosen to say leave the smoke screen and push for the rock just to get that like extra half a kilometer of radar onto the OHBOY DM and maybe give his Colombo one more shot, I think that definitely could have done it for them. But again, those are small decisions. It's easy to just say, okay, we've gotten 40,000 HP off this guy. We can call it here and then just play it from there. But here you can start seeing the decisions from OHBOY that they're making, where the Colombo is actually turning around to push towards A. They've seen the Stalingrad, I think, on B. They've seen the Marceau. So they know that there's only a gearing and DM left on A.
Yep.
So you can see that as the match progresses here, they're going to start to rotate. The Stalingrad actually backs up 2, and the Delny is getting ready to run down that one line. And you can see the gearing there just going down straight away is basically entirely separated from his Des Moines.
Yeah.
And you can see he lays that kind of like aggressive smoke screen down here to maybe do some own farming of his own, but
I'm not too sure about that whole play. In general, especially as a gearing or any smoker that you're pairing up with a radar cruiser, you generally should never leave the side of your cruiser unless you're going for spotting explicitly, which is after you have laid the smoke already. And in that case, the cruiser is actually able to help you with the gunfight and probably basically make sure that you don't get pushed too deep, and you can probably survive that engagement.
And it's good to note here that they didn't see the Delny from OHBOY rotate anywhere, so they have to assume he's still on that flank. And maybe he wasn't expecting the Delny to run so aggressively back at him, but in this case it just ends up being, I think, probably the crucial mistake for his team here, where instead of controlling the A cap now, the Des Moines is basically alone, can't run away fast enough from the Delny and the Colombo, and is basically guaranteed dead as well. So that's a very key pick for OHBOY here that essentially gets them 2 kills for the price of 1.
Yep.
And I think is basically the key here for them cracking open the rest of the map. And you can see as the match progresses, the Stalingrad and Marceau in middle aren't really able to face off against the Des Moines in the channel here from OHBOY. This is a very strong position in that because both of TIVAT's battleships are playing the east side of the map, there's no battleship fire from the middle from TIVAT spawn to pressure him. So he can just sit in this channel, trade HE with the Stalingrad and burn it down, which basically helps win B for OHBOY as well. And you can see there's basically just not really enough presence or kills left on the board for TIVAT to have a chance here.
Yeah, I think overall, OHBOY played that one a bit better. They played their reactionary game, as I like to call it, a bit better. They realized what openings that TIVAT had given them and tried to exploit them, and they did very successfully. And overall, I really enjoyed the game that we just watched, and I hope a similar thing, if not a bit more close, happens on map 2.
Yep. I think for the first time today, we actually do have a render available.
Amazing.
So we can break down game number 2 here in the grand finals and go over the back and forth here towards the end of that match, which was quite crazy.
So let's go over to the render.
All right. Take us away, Baz. We have, I think, very similar deployments again from the two teams here, with the exception of the double Ragnar pick from OHBOY. Being a little ambitious here to try to fast cap B. I just want to point out at this point, this is basically what you will see from most teams playing this map. You have the 112 kilometer radar on the Thunderdome Island here. You have the second 12 kilometer radar on the home cap position here. And these two ships together basically give you permanent radar coverage over the B cap.
Yep.
OHBOY may be gambling that Rain wouldn't put one of the Moscows in this position and hoping for a fast cap maybe before the Moscows are finally set up. Because if you can get the B cap early, it's very hard for the other team to take it back. But unfortunately for OHBOY, their gamble didn't pay off. They took a little bit of damage on the Ragnars, but nothing too catastrophic.
Yep.
So decent early game play from them, but didn't quite pan out. And then again, you can see I want to point out the very aggressive Delny play from Gangbrang on the 10 line here actually forces the immediate smoke screen on the C line for OHBOY.
Yeah.
And this is very important if you're trying to execute a home cap push. You want to make the enemy smoke cruisers basically be smoking as far back as possible.
Yeah, I think it's also very important, as you said already, to force the enemy team to use the smoke from their smoke destroyer early and defensively. Yeah. If you use it defensively, it means that you're giving up ground, trying to survive. And for Rain, they were laying an aggressive smoke screen towards them, towards OHBOY's deployment, which meant that they were actively gaining space from their smoke screen.
You can see the very aggressive line here on the F line moving up towards the E line here, basically in the middle of the map, being very well positioned to actually start breaking this Des Moines position that I think Rain is expecting OHBOY to take.
Yep.
And again, you can see the very aggressive position from the Ohio here being ready to crossfire this Des Moines.
Yep.
And again, the Colbert pick with those very floaty shell ballistics can arc over the island either from the smoke screen or once he moves a little bit further back towards his home cap.
Yep.
So a very deliberate setup here from Rain. I think knowing the positions that OHBOY likes to take, reading their lineup, knowing that the Des Moines would probably take that position, and making the most of their Delny to create the space for them to make this happen.
Yeah, definitely. I think the whole, at least east side of the map, was very well coordinated from Rain, and they clearly had something cooking from the very start of the game where they had a set plan. And I think that was clearly to snipe out the Des Moines position over next to the C cap. Okay.
All right, we can play the replay forward here. You can see that the Delny from Rain does try to block the A cap for a little bit, but is caught out of position there. Takes the face check with the OHBOY Delny. But the OHBOY Delny with Colombo support can take that away. And at this point in the match, you should note the ship positions here, where again, the Des Moines and Gearin from OHBOY have had to smoke very far back in their spawn almost. And we have a very aggressive smoke from Rain on the D line, basically giving them a lot of open space to work with, letting them again put fire into this Des Moines' rear so that he can't reverse. And then you even have John's Colbert with the very floaty ballistics able to arc over the island.
Yeah, they've clearly set up their push to basically go for this sort of box where you're able to deny this very, I would say, strong position. We used to see this position previously be played by something like a Petropavlovsk, but we've seen it be played by Moskvas as well as Des Moines. In this case, the Petro and is banned, but the Moskva is also an option there, but I think it's a bit harder to play purely because the Moskva is actually much bigger and harder to maneuver
I would
into that
definitely say
position.
a Moskva would have probably even died faster in this position than
Most
the Des Moines,
definitely.
just because it doesn't have the acceleration. It's a bigger target. Can't hide behind the island as well, even though it does have the larger HP pool and the armor.
Yeah, and I think it's very likely that when he was making the play from this sort of position to going down and into the channel, basically, a Moscow would have been spotted, and you have Ohio sitting here basically looking for that crossfire potential. So the Moscow would have probably taken a hit or two and would have lost most of his HP. Whereas the Des Moines didn't get spotted because he has better concealment. Yeah,
so definitely a strong position for OHBOY to take, but not able to protect it because of the lack of the Delny on the 10 line. And you can see here that with the Des Moines position in the smoke, they're able to put so much damage onto that Vermont. And then from here, you can see the Colombo and Ragnar choosing to push out towards Rain's spawn here. After clearing the Delny is usually a strong play, but in Rain's case, they know it's going to happen. So immediately, once losing the Delny, the Ohio and Moscow push up towards the middle of the map here to coordinate with their home cap push and actually take out the ships from OHBOY towards their home cap. So what I would have liked to see personally is maybe push the Colombo and Ragnar aggressively out in front of the Ohio and Moscow.
For sure.
And try to just maybe block the push that way. And then also maybe be able to contribute across the channel towards the home cap play. But again, very difficult decisions to make in the moment. And again, Rain being a very experienced team, basically knows what's about to happen. So they see their Delny goes down in the A cap. I think instantly they know that, okay, the OHBOY ships are going to try to push through A, which means we have to do something now with our ships on B before they die.
And this is where I also saw the potential of the Ohio actually just turning left into the Thunderdome and probably being safe inside there for the time being. if he had any heals left, that would have been the perfect time to use them. And then maybe he goes to A actually and tries to contest and cap the A cap, because realistically speaking, the Colombo coming back to deal with the Ohio that's fairly low is a completely wasted effort.
Yeah, for
So it would have just been the Delny and maybe the Ragnar if they really wanted to commit that much resources into taking out a low HP battleship that was capping.
For
So
sure.
it's like you're trading resources for a kill and a cap. Is it worth it? It's very difficult to make that decision in the heat of the moment.
Yep. I will note here that even though OHBOY is in a very bad position at this point, that they managed to almost bring it back at the end in a pretty deep bloodbath. They'll actually, I think, end up turning this Des Moines gearing smokescreen back around and pushing back in, which is, again, when you're in this losing position, it can be hard to know what to do. But really the key is to try to make something aggressive happen, try to force the enemy team to make a mistake,
Yep.
and then see if you can capitalize.
Certainly. And I think there's also important to note that sheep storps from this sort of area that were constantly going down this lane
Yep.
were really good, and they were actually super disruptive for the force that's over here, because every minute or so, they had to turn to dodge the torps, and every time that happens, you're losing crucial amount of time that you need to actually make your way back into the caps.
Yep, you're giving Rain time to tick on those caps, you're giving them time to close the point lead, but you can see here that they do coordinate those 3 ships to turn back around and actually manage to capitalize on, I believe, Lucar's Mosfa taking the aggressive push into the middle there. And again, the rush at the end with the Delny getting taken out by John and the Colbert, half a second before the ram, is pretty crucial. The Des Moines probably would have still died afterwards to the Colombo.
Yeah.
But again, it might have given them time to finish off the Colbert kill here, and then maybe get into the B cap with the Ragnar, but I think both cases, Rain is probably still looking set to win the match.
Yeah, definitely. I think the kill from the gearing in the end was the thing that pushed them over the 1,000 points. So even if they happen to lose it, they still have at least 1 cap ticking for them, which should have been a game securing cap.
Yeah. And again, I think just the key to mention here. Right, Baz, take us away. Again, very east-focused deployment here from OHBOY. Just the gearing Des Moines going towards the west, and every other ship basically past the 6 line, focusing on the D and E caps here. Not even very aggressively slanted towards the C cap. Rain being able to take that away. And you can see from this point in the replay, the kind of aggressive positions that OHBOY is opting to take, where you have the Marseille pushed all the way up. The Kremlin is already making his way up through the islands here, and then the Delny will be able to move up the 9-10 line in just a moment. And Rain opting to put the Howden Leo here is a pretty strong spot for it, because it can get airstrikes very well angled towards the Mosfa, where it's dropping along the length of the ship, which is what it wants. And then it also has nice airstrikes towards the islands on the E-cap. But the problem for Rain here is that they don't have anything to actually help hold the Howden's position. Their Ohio is being forced very far away by the Marseille and the Delny farm, and the Z42 basically can't sit on this rock here with the Marseille taking that position.
Yeah, definitely. I think the opening deployment from OHBOY, especially towards the E-cap, was very strong. I really love the idea of putting the Marseille on the aggressive rock, basically on the enemy side of the cap. And there is really no good way of digging him out of that position other than using the Gooden airstrikes. But then you're basically making the decision of, do you want to make sure the Marseille dies, which no one else can shoot at, or do you want to drop the Moskva with the Gooden airstrike and then try to farm it with the Ohio and the Moskva and potentially the Z42 as well?
If the Ohio wants to shoot the Marseille, he basically has to be playing around where the Howden is right now, so he can shoot the bow. And if he's playing there, you have a Colombo, you have a Des Moines, you have a Moskva set up here from OHBOY on that 7 line that could probably farm him out very quickly. So Rain opting not to take that position because they know it will probably result in their Ohio dying. Instead, force very far away here, and you can see that OHBOY basically takes a hugely commanding control over the D and E caps here. So Rain opts to actually rotate their Delny towards the east side of the map here, basically trying to play into the OHBOY push here. I mean, at this point, do you think that there's a viable target for them to farm down, or maybe they would have been better served rotating towards the west?
I think the best target they still have is actually the Moskva that's sitting in the D cap right now. The problem obviously is that they have basically no control over this sort of area, and you really need to have like this box especially in control if you want to be able to farm down at the Moskva. And that is basically impossible to take given the presence of OHBOY in this position. And From this point on, I think the correct play actually would have been to give up the DE side and play fully for the ABC caps.
Sure. I think maybe if they opted to recognize that, say, for example, this Kremlin is going to be extremely hard to dig away from the channel position, the Ohio doesn't really have a great push back down this line. So maybe bringing the Delny out towards the 4 line, try to force maybe a spot on the gearing DM smoke.
Yeah.
And then look for the home cap push to flip the 3 caps over there, possibly combined with a kill to flip the point lead. May have been the proper play here, but it's hard to say. And one of the problems for Rain also is that they have these Mosfas stuck on these island positions, where if they don't really have a viable way to push out and through, if they give up control over the 9-10 line and OHBOY is eventually able to push out through here, the Mosfas are in a very kind of compromised position.
Definitely.
So it's definitely a hard call to make. And really, I think from this point, OHBOY just had a hugely commanding lead. So you can see as the game progresses here that Rain does try to farm down the Kremlin. But again, farming down a Kremlin is really not the target that you want to be farming down.
No.
It's basically the most survivable battleship in the game. And then North basically showing us why it is the shortest duration map in the pool here, with OHBOY ticking away on the 3 caps there, closing out the game very quickly.
Yeah, I think the amount of caps in this map are definitely something that is catching teams out, even in the finals, I feel like at this point, because you really have to spread your forces quite thin. When you have 5 caps to potentially contest, there will almost always be 1 to 2 caps ticking at any given time. Whereas on the smaller amount of cap maps, where there's maybe only 3 caps, it's unlikely that all 3 caps will be ticking the whole time.
Or even that 1 cap is ticking in the early game, because it's more likely for all 3 to be contested, for example.
Exactly. So that's why we see North games go so fast.